In the mid-1930s, America was going through very difficult times. After the stock market crash in 1929, the Great Depression began, a period when the entire economy of the country collapsed. The government was left almost without money. There were no funds for social programs, for the Army, or for the Navy. Military spending was reduced to a minimum, so the Army and Navy suffered from a shortage of everything necessary. There was no money even for basic needs, let alone for creating new weapons or modern equipment. The American Army in those years was poorly prepared for war. All equipment was outdated, and new developments remained only on paper due to a lack of funds. The Navy, which was supposed to protect maritime borders, also suffered from a shortage of resources. When new ships were built, they tried to save on everything to create the best possible ship for the lowest possible cost. But such savings often led to poor results. The ships turned out weak, with thin armor or insufficient weapons, and therefore could not fight properly. American aviation was in just as poor condition. The armament consisted mainly of old biplanes from the Curtiss and Boeing companies. These machines had one advantage: they were maneuverable, meaning they could turn well in the air, but the disadvantages were far greater. The biplanes had weak engine power, so they climbed slowly and could not reach high speeds. The maximum speed rarely exceeded 300 kilometers per hour, which was already considered very low at the time. The aircraft could not fly far, and their climb rate was very slow. In addition, they were very vulnerable in combat. Thin skin without armor meant that even a small hit could bring the aircraft down. The armament of these biplanes consisted of 2 ordinary machine guns of 7.62 mm caliber, with an ammunition supply of 150 to 200 rounds each. Such weapons were sufficient for the battles of World War I, but by the 1930s they were no longer enough. Shooting down an enemy aircraft was possible only with great luck, hitting the most critical parts. Alongside the old biplanes, modern aircraft were also being created in America. For example, the Boeing B-15 and B-17 bombers. The B-17, called the Flying Fortress, had a strong structure, could fly long distances, and carry many bombs. But there were very few such aircraft, only a handful. Producing such machines was very expensive, and due to the crisis, the government could not afford to build them in large numbers. At the beginning of 1935, the American Navy announced a competition to create a new carrier-based fighter. This step was a response to the urgent need to update naval aviation, which was to become the foundation of naval strategy. The requirements for the new aircraft were high. It had to be fast, maneuverable, capable of taking off from a ship's deck, and surpass the old aircraft in all respects. The competition interested several aviation companies, but the main struggle unfolded between 2 firms, Grumman and Brewster. Each of them offered its own project, which had to satisfy the needs of the Navy while also fitting into the limited budget caused by the country's economic difficulties. Grumman, known for its work on carrier-based aircraft, submitted a project based on its older F-3F plane. The company's designers decided not to invent something radically new, but to improve a time-tested design. They reworked the F-3F into a modern monoplane, retaining key elements such as a strong structure and a metal fuselage. The Grumman aircraft had an enclosed cockpit and retractable landing gear, which was an advanced feature for a carrier-based fighter. However, the project also had drawbacks. It remained heavy due to a weak engine of 700 horsepower, which limited both speed and climbing ability. Despite its practical approach, Grumman failed to offer a sufficiently inexpensive solution, which became a critical factor in the competition. In contrast, the Brewster Company, less known in the aviation field, presented a project that attracted the Navy's attention with its simplicity and lower cost. The Brewster Aeronautical Company was part of an old American firm that began its activity in the 19th century, producing mail coaches and horse-drawn wagons. In the 1870s, with the start of the railway boom, the company shifted to mass production of rail cars. Only in the 1930s did Brewster decide to try its hand at aircraft manufacturing, creating a special division headquartered on Long Island, near New York. This transition from wagons to airplanes may seem unusual, but it reflected the company's desire to adapt to new market realities. Their experience in mass production turned out to be useful, since the Navy was looking not only for an effective, but also for an affordable aircraft. The Brewster project, designated XF2A1, had several key advantages. The aircraft's design was simpler than the Grumman project, which reduced production costs. There is a legend that the XF2A1 fuselage was developed using technology similar to that used for creating railway tank cars. This ensured strength and simplicity of manufacture, although it also added weight to the structure. The aircraft had a metal fuselage, an all-metal skin, and modern armament for that time, which included one ordinary and one heavy machine gun. Such an approach promised greater firepower compared to the old aircraft used by the Navy. The Navy's choice in favor of Brewster was driven primarily by economic considerations. At a time when the Navy's budget was limited, and new aircraft were often built with rented engines or without development funding, Brewster's proposal turned out to be more attractive. Their project promised to achieve the required performance at lower costs than Grumman's proposal. Although Grumman had greater experience in building carrier-based aircraft, their project required larger investments, which did not fit into the strict financial constraints. Thus, at the end of 1935, Brewster received an order to build a prototype of the XF2A1, which became the first step toward the creation of the aircraft later known as the F2A Buffalo. This choice caused surprise in aviation circles. How could a company that previously had no significant experience in aircraft manufacturing surpass professional designers? The answer lay in practicality and economy. Brewster offered a solution that met the Navy's requirements without requiring large development costs or complex production. It was a compromise that reflected the spirit of the time: maximum efficiency with minimum resources. Whether this decision would be a success or a failure was to be determined during testing. But even then, it was clear that Brewster had gained a chance to enter the history of aviation. For the Brewster Company, this order was extremely important. If the aircraft failed the tests, the contract would be canceled and the firm could go bankrupt. The main requirement was difficult. The fighter had to fly at a speed of no less than 444 kilometers per hour. The new aircraft had an all-metal fuselage, which made it strong and modern. It was powered by a Wright Cyclone engine with 850 horsepower and a 3-bladed propeller. The armament consisted of 2 machine guns of different calibers, one ordinary, the other heavy. This gave it significantly greater firepower than the old biplane fighters of the Navy. The landing gear retracted inside, and the cockpit was enclosed. All of this made the machine very modern for its time. But there were also drawbacks. Due to its background in building rail cars, Brewster had previously manufactured railway wagons. The aircraft turned out quite heavy. The first flight tests revealed a serious problem. Even without extra equipment, with a polished surface and a lightened configuration, the XF2A1 could not reach the required speed of 444 kilometers per hour. For Brewster, this was a true nightmare. The Navy clearly stated, if the aircraft did not meet the requirements, the contract would be terminated. Then the designers took a revolutionary step. They decided to test the actual aircraft in the huge wind tunnel of the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics at Langley Field. This was the first time in U.S. history that a full-size aircraft was tested in such a way. The wind tunnel tests revealed all the problems of the aircraft. It turned out that the engine cowling had the wrong shape and created excessive drag. The seams between metal sheets were poorly sealed, which also slowed the aircraft down. In addition, the protruding rivets on the surface created air turbulence that worsened the airflow. Based on these results, the designers reworked many details. The engine cowling was made smoother, All seams were carefully sealed, and part of the protruding rivets was replaced with flush rivets that did not stick out above the surface. After these changes, the XF2A1 once again took to the air. The result exceeded all expectations. The aircraft accelerated to 487 kilometers per hour. This was significantly above the contract requirements. After the successful testing of the XF2A1 prototype, the Brewster Company received an order for the production of 55 combat aircraft under the name F2A1. Thanks to its experience in railcar manufacturing, the firm quickly mastered the production of aircraft and completed the contract by mid-autumn 1938. This was a major achievement, since in the 1930s in the United States, due to economic problems, it was difficult to quickly manufacture military equipment. Out of the 55 aircraft, 11 went to the Naval Squadron VF3, nicknamed Felix the Cat, which served on American aircraft carriers. The remaining 44 machines were sold to Finland, which was in great need of modern aircraft for its air force. Finland at that time was in a difficult situation. Its aviation was weak, and there was little money to buy new equipment. The F2A1, although not fully meeting the requirements of the American Navy in terms of range and armament, became a good choice for the Finns. The aircraft was simple to manufacture and inexpensive, which suited a country with a limited budget. To allow the aircraft to operate from land airfields rather than ship decks, the F2A1 was modified and given a new designation, B-239. The aircraft had its carrier equipment removed, the arresting hook, the life raft located behind the pilot seat, and the lower cockpit windows, which proved impractical and were covered with an aluminum panel. The tail skid was replaced with a regular wheel, and the Wright Cyclone engine of 850 horsepower was replaced with a more powerful version of 950 horsepower. These changes made the B-239 more suitable for land use. The aircraft were delivered to Finland in disassembled form and assembled at the Saab company's plants in Sweden. This process demonstrated international cooperation, since Sweden, as a neutral country, had a developed industry capable of handling such a task. In addition, the Finnish company Valmet attempted to set up its own production of the B-239, with a wooden wing instead of a metal one. This experimental aircraft was named Humu. However, due to a lack of resources and the complexity of production, only one unit was made. This unique aircraft has survived to this day and is the only surviving example of the Brewster Buffalo, displayed in Finland's Aviation Museum. The Humu became a symbol of Finnish ingenuity and the desire to adapt foreign equipment to local needs. The Finnish Air Force further improved the B-239 after receiving the aircraft. In particular, they installed their own Vaisala THM-40 sights, which improved shooting accuracy. Instead of the life raft behind the pilot's seat, a radio station with a circular antenna was installed, providing better communication during combat. The armament of the B-239 consisted of one machine gun of 7.62 mm caliber and one of 12.7 mm caliber, as well as two additional heavy machine guns in the wings, which made it effective against light enemy aircraft. These improvements became the basis for future modifications that made the B-239 one of the most successful variants of the Buffalo in combat use. The sale to Finland was an important step for Brewster, as it not only expanded the sales market, but also demonstrated the company's ability to adapt its aircraft to the needs of different countries. For the American Navy, the F2A1 was the first step toward creating a modern carrier-based fighter, though its capabilities still remained a compromise. For Finland, however, the B-239 became a valuable asset that soon proved its effectiveness in real combat conditions, particularly during the Winter War of 1939 to 1940. This successful export laid the foundation for the further development of the model and its use on the international stage. After the successful release of the first F2A1 model, the Brewster Company continued to improve its fighter to meet the growing needs of the United States Navy and foreign customers. In the United States, the F2A2 and F2A3 remained main carrier-based fighters only briefly. Already between March and May 1941, they were replaced with the more modern Wildcats on the carriers Lexington and Saratoga. The F2A2s were transferred to shore bases, where they were used as training aircraft, and some machines served until 1945 as part of the Panama Canal Air Defense Group. A small number of F2A2s, fewer than 10, served on escort carriers in 1941 to 1942, performing missions to search for German submarines in the North Atlantic and the Caribbean Sea. They were credited with 8 sightings and 1 damaged submarine. The most dramatic episode of the F2A3's combat use was the clash at Midway in 1942. A Marine Corps squadron, which was based first at Pearl Harbor and later redeployed to Midway Atoll, was armed with these aircraft. During the battle, the Japanese destroyed 13 F2A3s in the air and another 6 on the ground. American pilots managed to shoot down only 3 Japanese bombers and 2 fighters. Such defeat was explained by 2 factors: the moral obsolescence of the F2A3, which could not compete with Japanese aircraft, particularly the famous Zero, and the low level of training of the Marine Corps pilots. The Japanese completely dominated the air, which made the Americans' task practically impossible. Despite failures in the United States, the Buffalo showed potential in the hands of skilled pilots, as demonstrated by other countries that used these aircraft. Various versions of the F2A2, F2A3, and B339 became the basis for export, securing Brewster's reputation as a supplier of affordable fighters for countries with limited budgets.